word. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not recognize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of a large number of fish. Then the disciples whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Verse 10, Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew that it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. You know, last week we celebrated Easter, or Resurrection Sunday. And after the resurrection, Jesus revealed himself to many different people. Apostle Paul tells us that for a period of many days, he appeared to numerous number of people. Sometimes it was to smaller groups, like last week we looked at the 2 men, right, who were walking back to their house. Other times it was to the disciples. Other times it was to others that the scripture doesn't really reveal how often and how many. But it was to the disciples that he appeared several occasions in Jerusalem. And during one of those times, he had told them, hey, go to Galilee and wait for me there. The disciples do as Jesus commands. They are in Galilee. When we come to John chapter 21, we are in Galilee. And the disciples are there waiting for Jesus. How long did they wait? We're not told. What did they do while they're waiting? It doesn't seem like they did much. So we pick up the story as they are in Galilee and they're waiting for Jesus. And the idea this morning for me that I want to highlight is the aspect of, for the disciples, the waiting aspect was challenging. We also know then that as they waited for Jesus, they couldn't just sit around. So as they waited for Jesus, we pick up in verse 2 what Simon Peter and the disciples end up doing. But the first point this morning is this, that they needed to fill the sudden void in their lives. As they were waiting, all of a sudden, they had this void in their lives. What do I mean by this is that prior to the death of Jesus, they were always with Jesus. They were constantly going from place to place. 1 minute, the disciples are going from city to city. For 3 years, they went from city to city, location one to another. They were surrounded by large crowds. They witnessed amazing miracles, and they listened to great, powerful messages and enjoyed private, intimate meals and instruction from Jesus. This was their life for 3 years. It was like intense 3-year period of constantly on the move. All of a sudden, that was gone. They find themselves in Galilee waiting. They needed to fill this void, this sudden void. All of a sudden, they are alone. There are no crowds around them. They're just with their closest friends. In this occasion, in verse 2, we're told that there's 7 of them together: Simon, Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, sons of Zebedee, you guys know who that is, John and his brother. 2 other disciples who are unnamed, but they're together. Jesus had instructed them to go to Galilee and wait there. That's a lot of time on their hands. What did they do with this void? In verse 3, Peter announced that he's going fishing. He says, I'm going out to fish. The others said, hey, that's a great idea. We'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, and they went fishing. But that night, they caught nothing. Peter was a professional fisherman. John was a professional fisherman as well as others. The question that people ask in this passage is, were they abandoning their role or their call as a disciple? When Peter announces, I'm going fishing, was that I'm going back fishing? I don't know about you guys, but I cannot wait anymore. Jesus, he's not showing up. I got to make a living. I'm going to go fish. Was it in that sense that Peter made this announcement? So there are those who are critical of the disciples for going fishing because they see it as an abandonment of their calling. They view it as they're going back to what they were doing, their old way of life. But others see it as, man, they had to fill the void in their life. They had time on their hands. They're waiting for Jesus, and he's not there. You ever have guests over in your house? Maybe friends, relatives spend the night at your house for several days, and the house is packed, and all of a sudden, they leave. The house is quiet, kind of eerily quiet. Hannah's parents have moved to Portland, and it was a couple of weeks ago. Kids didn't have school one of the Fridays, and so we sent them over there to spend the night. They spent like 2 days over there, and then we brought them home, and my mother-in-law texted Hannah, the kids are gone, house is quiet, I got nothing to do. It's kind of like that void, right? Whenever we used to visit them when they were living in San Diego, same thing. We would visit them, spend 3 or 4 days together. When we leave, they're like, the house is quiet, there's no kids running around, and it's just the 2 of them. It's kind of like that here for the disciples. 1 minute, within like weeks, they went from always being surrounded by people, traveling to all of these places, and all of a sudden they had to be stationary and they had to wait. Waiting is really difficult, isn't it? What's the longest you've ever had to wait for something? What's the longest you've ever had to wait for something? I had a friend, he was a Canadian citizen. He had been going to school here in the U.S., but unfortunately, through circumstances, he allowed his status to expire. And so he needed to continue school, but in order to do so, he had to go back into Canada, process all of the paperwork, and then re-enter the U.S. So we got everything ready on our end down here. And he was getting ready to go to school. So my friend, myself, and another friend, we said, let's make it a road trip. We'll drive up there with you. Hope you process everything that we can do, and then we'll come back. So after a few days, we drove up to Vancouver. And he spent the day with his grandfather, going to whatever immigration office that are there, doing all of these things. He got his paperwork done. And after about 3 or 4 days, it was time for us to return or re-enter the U.S. My Canadian friend's uncle thought it would be better if the 2 of them drove separately so that 2 Canadian nationals come to the border, show the paperwork, and if they ask, oh, he's going to school, and I am simply taking him down, or something to that effect. So it was a good idea. So he had me and my friend to go across the border first and go to Denny's and wait. So we went to Denny's. We went through, no problem. It was later in the evening. We chose to go through later at nighttime when it was less crowded. So we go across, we're sitting in Denny's, we order some food, and we're sitting there, we're eating. And my friend and I are like, dude, what's going to happen? Is he going to make it? He was out of status for a long period of time. There's no record of him doing anything in Canada. We thought those were red flags that would potentially prevent him from coming back in. So we're sitting there in Denny's for what seemed like an eternity. This was over 20 years ago. Actually, I saw him last night and I said, hey, I'm going to talk about you tomorrow. And we talked about that event that day and how it's like, his wife now is like, wow, you guys did all of this? Like, yeah, it was a crazy adventure. But as we sat there, this was over 20 years ago. We had cell phones, but we didn't have smartphones. We had nothing to do in Denny's. Just passing our time by just talking, wondering, eating. We were told by his uncle that if they didn't make it, he would send us a text. So we waited. We were constantly looking at our phone. A text comes in, we're like, is it that? Oh no, it's not them. After what seemed like an eternity, my friend and his uncle came walking in. They made it through. We took him into our car. We drove down. His uncle turned around, and he went back in. But that wait, which only turned out to be a couple hours, it seemed like an eternity because we had no idea. There was no certainty. Waiting is difficult. Most of us, we want to maximize that wait time with something productive. For example, when your kids are in soccer practice, what do? You say, okay, how much time do I have? While they're in soccer practice, you go grocery shopping or you do something else. You don't just sit around if you can't help it. You want to maximize that time. I believe that is what's happening here. They're waiting for Jesus. They just can't sit still. Peter is not that type of a person. He's like, you know what? Better than waiting around, I'm going to go fishing. This is something I used to do. I enjoy it. I haven't fished in years. I'm going to go fishing. And the other disciples, they join him. He goes fishing. They set out at nighttime to go fish. What we're told is that they fished all night and they caught nothing. Have you ever gone fishing and caught nothing? It happens. Depends what you're fishing for, I suppose. I know people who fish for salmon and they go out, they strike out 2/3 of the time. They don't even get a bite. Other times they catch something, but they have to release it because it's a wild salmon. Because they can only keep certain hatchery, or there's certain types of different types of salmon that they can catch and keep at a certain time of the year. Others, they have to release them. Or sometimes they snag a salmon on the side where the salmon is not biting. And those you cannot keep as well. There's all these rules and regulations. Fishing was rough for them. It's not because they fished at night. In fact, nighttime is when they normally fish. During the daytime, the fish will go to the depths, and then at nighttime, they will come to the surface to feed. And that is the best time for fishing. So these were professional fishermen. They followed exact protocol, and yet we're told that they caught nothing. And that is a terrible feeling, to fish for hours and hours and catch nothing. Disciples are tired, they're frustrated, and they're probably in disbelief that they caught nothing. They feel the sudden void in their life, and they went fishing, but it really didn't help them at all. Yeah, they passed time, but without success, if the conditions are miserable, I'm talking like it's rainy, it's wet, it's cold, and you catch fish, you're happy. But in those same conditions, if you don't catch anything, you are miserable. That is what's going on. I feel like they are just like, dejected. And in this moment, there's a stranger on shore who engages in conversation. We see that the disciples are filling the void in their lives at this moment. They've had an unsuccessful night of fishing. And to add to that, there is this advice of a stranger, which is our second point. There's an advice of a stranger that really beckons them to follow it. It doesn't make any sense, actually. Look at verse 4 and 5. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. After catching nothing all night long, as the day begins to break, they're about 100 yards from the shore, according to the verses, a couple verses later. A stranger asked, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" And the way that Jesus phrases this question, it expects a negative answer. "Haven't you any fish?" The expected answer is, "No, we don't have any." And listen to the advice this stranger gives them in verse 6. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Does this make any sense? They were not that far from shore. It's getting brighter outside, which means the fish have now begun to move down into the depths. Yet, what do we see? Disciples let down the nets. This is an incredible moment. Seasoned fishermen, they know this is not the time to catch fish. We're only 100 yards from shore. What can we possibly catch? How exasperated were the disciples that they listened to this stranger? They were seasoned fishermen. Yet, what did? They let down their nets. This stranger says, "Hey, let down your nets on the right side of the boat." So as I'm thinking about that, I'm like, wait, were the nets in the water still at this time? Were they still trying to get one last casting of a net? Or were they just simply on their way back in? Doesn't matter, but Jesus says, "Cast your net on the right side of the boat." They do. What compels them to heed this advice of a stranger? Maybe they thought, is he seeing something from the shore that we're not seeing here? And this is a very similar encounter as recorded in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Jesus, in that story, Jesus is teaching the people from the boat. It is daytime, and Jesus tells Peter, "Head out to the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." We had just said that the best time to catch fish is during the evening. This is daytime. Only boat that went out to fish that day was Peter's boat. And Peter's like, "Oh, are you serious? You want me to do this in the middle of the day?" So he rows out. And what does Peter say? It's Luke chapter 5, verse 5. He says this, "Simon answered, 'Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything.'" Notice the similarities of the story. "But because you say so, I will let down the nets." Same situation. They fished all night. They struck out. And yet here's Jesus saying, "Hey, let's go fishing." Oh, Jesus, I cannot believe. And then everybody wondering, because he had just taught the people. And then he's saying, "Peter, let's go out to the shore." Everybody's watching. Hey, what's Peter doing? He's rowing the boat. All eyes, I assume all eyes were on them. And it had to be embarrassing for Peter in the middle of the day, after all of that they did the night before. "Okay, Master, because you say so, I will let down the nets." Picking up the nets and throwing it out. What happens? They catch so much fish that the net begins to tear. He signals to his partners. A second boat comes. They fill the boats with fish. Boats are sinking as they're coming back into shore. Peter says, "Because you say so, I will do it." This stranger tells them to let down the nets on the right side of the boat. They listen to the stranger, they let down the nets on the right side of the boat, and they catch fish miraculously. Net is filled with fish, so much that they could not haul the net in. In Luke chapter 5, when they set out to deep water and let down the nets, in the middle of the day, they caught a large number of fish, and the nets began to break. Here, they catch so much fish, yet the nets do not break. It is in that moment when John recognizes Jesus, verse 7, then the disciple whom Jesus loved, which is John, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And as soon as Simon Peter heard this, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. When you first read that a long time ago, or maybe today, you think, why does he put clothes on and jump into the water? And that's just Peter's personality. He wanted to get to Jesus fast. But the aspect of putting on the outer garment was that the nets in this time, as they are fishing, the nets would be open. And what fishermen would do is they would dive into the water to bring the nets kind of like together under the surface, so that it will close and then the fish will be pulled in. And so oftentimes they would work with very little clothing on, or sometimes they did it without any clothing on. It is the Lord. Peter's like, I gotta put on some clothes. But he cannot wait to see Jesus, so he jumps into the water, 100 yards away from shore. Maybe he swam for a part of the way and he walked to shore, whereas the others are dragging the net and coming to shore. For whatever reason earlier, they were unable to recognize Jesus. This is not the first time we've heard this, or we've been told this. There was something about the post-resurrection appearance of Jesus that prevented people from recognizing him. There was some kind of a change physically. There's a lot of different theories out there. Some scholars think maybe it's because of all of the, think about imagining the crown of thorns placed on his head, the lashes that he took, and the physical toll of the crucifixion placed a change in his appearance. There's nothing that tells us exactly why. Or maybe they were prevented, who knows? But they don't recognize him initially, but maybe it was this catch of fish. Soon as they caught fish, John looked up and it's like, there can only be one person who can do this. It is the Lord. And Peter's like, puts on his clothes, jumps in the water, they come to shore. And it is on the shores where Jesus takes this opportunity during this third appearance to the disciples. He reminds them of their mission, which is our third point. It was a night of failure in terms of fishing. They fished all night, but they caught nothing. Then through a stranger's advice, they let down the net on the right side of the boat, and miraculously, they catch 153 fish. Jesus prepares breakfast. He eats with his disciples. And Jesus didn't want them to go back to fishing for fish. Jesus had called them earlier. He had called them to be fishers of men. And that is what they will be doing from now on. It was not an accident that they caught nothing that night, I believe. If they had caught a lot of fish, it may have tempted them to return to their old careers, their old way of life. It was important for them not to catch anything so that Jesus can remind them of their mission, to be fishers of not of fish, but to be fishers of men. Jesus proves even after resurrection that he is the Lord, that he is powerful, and that he can do all things. And I love how he had breakfast prepared. He had a fire going. There were fish on the fire. How did the fish get there? Well, it's not inconceivable that Jesus could catch fish. They're there. He invites them. He invites them to a meal. And in the verses following today's passage, Jesus restores Peter. And Peter benefited greatly from this meal. I'm sure that he felt terrible, that he was disappointed in himself for denying Jesus, not once, not twice, but 3 times. In fact, it was around the fire that he denied Jesus, and it is around the fire that Jesus restores him. These men who had spent 3 years with Jesus were not to return to their old way, to their old lives, and to their old work. They had a mission that they must not forget. This breakfast is an opportunity for Jesus to remind them of that. The disciples had gone fishing. They will continue to go fishing, but not for fish. Jesus has called them to be fishers of men. And this third appearance of Jesus to his disciples is critical for realigning their vision to the mission. And the mission for all people is simple. We're called to be a disciple of Jesus, and we're called to go and make disciples. And we have an opportunity for that this summer as we go to the Navajo Nation, to people who are living in subpar conditions. No electricity, no running water. Some of the pictures I've seen so far have been it's hard to believe that that's in America, really, honestly. I feel like I haven't seen pictures from Tijuana, Mexico. But here in America, they're really living in subpar conditions. I want us to watch the video together this morning.
죽어가는 나의 백성들 절망과 굶주림에 갇힌 저들을 내 마음에 오랜 슬픔 고통의 멍에 매여 울고 있는 나의 자녀들 나는 이제 일어나 저들의 멍에를 꺾고 눈물 씻기길 원하는데 누가 내게 부르짖어 저들을 구원케 할까
This summer, God is giving us an opportunity to partner with the missionaries. We had hosted them last October, and the work that they're doing is tough. It's the Navajo Nation is, in terms of land, I think they are the largest of the Indian reservations in the U.S. They border 3 states. Actually, I don't know how much they come into Colorado, but they're right in that 4 corners of the U.S. And we are going to a place called Leechee, L-E-C-H-E-E. Leechee is how you pronounce that. And it's near Page, Arizona. I don't know if you know, I've heard of Page, Arizona. Page, Arizona is like the tourist destination of that northern Arizona. The reason is because Lake Powell is directly north of there, Antelope Canyon, if you've heard of that, is right there. Horseshoe Bend, it's that place where everybody's posts a selfie with the river behind them that looks like a horseshoe. I mean, that's all right there. That's all within 10, 15 minutes from this church that we're going to. And so on one side, you have people coming for tours, all of that without really realizing, even driving through Navajo Nation, Lichi community, not realizing the condition that these people are living in. There's two major ministries that we are focusing on this summer. We have broken it down simply to VBS and community service. VBS is pretty self-explanatory, right? So we will run VBS June 27th through 30th here, and then take what we've done, the program, and hopefully many people from that will go and do ministry for 3 days in the Lichi Church of the Nazarene. 3 days there. Second ministry is called community service, and what basically this is how can we serve the community? What are some ways that we can serve the community? Of course, we will have an opportunity to share the gospel. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we were going. And so we're planning to do door-to-door evangelism. We're going to go, as we go to door, we're going to do a very simple thing, checking for their, blood pressure and like blood sugar levels. Because one of the doctors in our church says that many Native Americans really struggle with diabetes, high blood pressure. Those are very common traits. And so we want to make sure that if they're not actively or regularly going to the doctor's office, that through that very little check, we may be able to help identify potential health risks there. So we'll be doing that. But also the church that we will be going to, they've asked us, we've asked them, what are some ways that we can help your church? And they said, we have some areas that we want to be painted. We said, okay, we'll do that. And other cleaning things, and even within the community, even within the church members, hey, do you have anything in your home that needs to be repaired? So we're beginning to collect a list of items. There are some things we will not be able to do in the time that we have, but maybe some things that we can do and help them. So those are some of the things that we will be doing. And ultimately, we just want to love and serve the Lichi community. This church, during COVID, the pastor passed away from COVID. And his son was thrust into ministry. It's like me dying and Timothy becoming a pastor. It literally is the current pastor has very little theological training. And so we want to see what are other opportunities that we have to help and equip him and empower him and really encourage him as he has taken on the role of the pastor, just because there really is nobody else. And so this is a church that we're going to, and at just even 2 weeks ago, they said no community gathering. What we had hoped for was a time where we can invite the entire community together and to serve them, share the gospel with them, to feed them. Even 2 weeks ago, they said no. But this past Wednesday, they had a meeting, and the missionaries went there and talked with them, and they said, yes, we would love to have that. And so they are coming out of the fear of COVID. Not just the pastor, but 4 other people from the church passed away during COVID. And so that's something that is always on the back of our minds. But, we want to go and we want to serve them. And we want to just make sure that we love on this community that really is forgotten. Drugs and alcohol is rampant. And when we talk about teens, there is a lot of abuse, and which has led to pregnancy rates for the teens of that community is high. And so we want to make sure that we go as a church. And this is the beginning. We had hoped to do this with Costa Rica, but through various things in COVID, Costa Rica was just, unfortunately, just a one time that we went. But with this Navajo Nation, the Lichi Church, we hope that this is the beginning of many years of partnership where we can encourage the community, encourage the church, and go and serve and share the gospel. And so, you know, in the back table, there's registration form. Basically, it's got all the information. So even if you are not sure you want to go, just take one, because you'll see the schedule of what we're doing, plus all the various information, costs, and all of those things. And so contact persons for that is for the next 2 weeks. And also at the bottom, it's like, what kind of ministries do you want to do? You know, I'm not sure. I'm not a VBS. I'm not a kind of a kid kind of guy. You know, it's okay. There's many other things. You know, our plan is to fly from here to Vegas and then rent a car from Vegas and drive from Vegas, about 4.5 hour drive to Page, Arizona. And so even VBS, we have to go pick up all the kids. And so we need drivers. We need drivers from airport to the church, and we need drivers within during the time of ministry as well. So, you know, those are some of the things. Bathroom, shower situation is not like your house. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind as well. But we are planning to get an Airbnb for all the females to have a clean bathroom and facility. So at least that should be, you know, one less thing to stress and worry about. But we have needs. We have to prepare all the meals for ourselves as well as the students during VBS, as well as anyone that comes to church during those hours and days that we're there, plus the final, the community event, gathering, banquet, or whatever you want to call that. So there's many needs out there, and we simply ask that you will just pray over the next several days, and maybe even a week or so, and that hopefully, if God is impressing upon your heart to go, that this summer you can be part of this amazing team. Let me invite the worship team up, and let's go ahead and sing our final song together.